The following review is podcast friendly, I suppose you'd call it. Basically, if you want to just hear the audio and not watch the video, you ain't gonna miss much. When playing this game, I was forced to ask the really tough questions. Questions like, if Jenny LeClue didn't have its distinct charm upheld by its brilliant artwork and writing, would it still be worth playing from a gameplay perspective? The answer is no, and that pretty much settles who I can recommend this game to. If you like games where the gameplay is solely used as a way to prop up the story, then Jenny LeClue is for you, but if you insist a game's primary gameplay loop must be its focus, then you should probably skip this one. You don't even need to watch the rest of the video if you don't want to, because for this game, the story is the main focus. And let's get right into the story, which is probably the most important part of a mystery game. And Jenny LeClue's story is especially interesting since it works in two layers. On the innermost layer, you play as Jenny LeClue, a young girl detective who lives in the quiet traditional town of Arthurtown, and she really wants to be a true detective solving big cases, but she ends up learning she should be careful what she wishes for when she has to clear her mother's name after she's accused of murder. The player must guide Jenny as she goes from place to place, solving puzzles, interrogating suspects, and making logical deductions, mostly through the use of specific minigames for each task, but on the outermost layer, however, you play as a completely different character. In fact, you don't play as a character at all. You play as a sort of an invisible force overseeing an author named Arthur K. Finkelstein, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who just so happens to be the author of a series of books starring, guess who? Jenny LeClue. Yes, this is the kind of game that is about a story within a story, and the story of Arthur himself is the ever-interesting story of the struggles of writers to meet the expectations of their readers, because he wants to keep Jenny safe and have her go on small adventures, small cases with no danger, but after so many books, the readers are bored and his editor demands excitement. His sections act more as little interludes between Jenny's segments, but they do allow you to somehow directly alter Jenny's story, as well as gaze into what might be in store by looking at Arthur's notes. The best segments in the story, in my opinion, are when Arthur and Jenny directly interact with each other, which is a little bit weird since it's not like Jenny ever acknowledges the fourth wall, but it's always amusing as Arthur keeps trying to pull Jenny into choosing a safe route, only for her to disregard him by taking bigger and bigger risks in order to save her mom. Almost as if she took a life of her own and is rebelling against the author of her own story. It's a pretty neat trick, and surprisingly never gets old during the entirety of the game, while allowing Arthur to constantly foreshadow how ridiculous it is for a kid detective to uncover such a massive conspiracy on her own, even if that's what his readers truly want. As for the gameplay itself, we couldn't escape that even in a story-focused game. You control Jenny on a 2D plane, going left, right, left, that kind of stuff, platformer style, and you can choose to interact with the environment to solve puzzles. But you are never really lost since whatever you can interact with is always clearly marked. And when you interact with it, you either activate it, carry it with you to solve a puzzle somewhere else, or play a little minigame related to it. But the real genius of the gameplay is that you always have to do everything by yourself. Even if it's something as simple as pulling down a lever, you have to tap a button to do it. In fact, one of the coolest things, at least visually, is when you have to hold down buttons and Jenny scribbles notes all over the screen based on the most minute of details, as if she's a kid version of Sherlock Holmes. And that's just it. In some games, you can press a button in front of a ladder and the character will just climb it to the top alone. They will open doors alone. You just press a button and the animation plays, but not in Jenny LeClue. You are always in control. There are no cutscenes that can move forward without you. There are no deductions that are made without your input. Even the most simple of actions you are in control. And that is how the game manages to keep you engaged with it, even at the most story-heavy moments. That does not mean I can wholeheartedly recommend Jenny LeClue, because it does have two very low points, but to explain those I'll have to go into some very mild spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled at all, and you already decided to buy this game, okay, that's fine, but I'm gonna spoil some two minor plot points. And the first one is that at some point after the first half of the game, Jenny enters an underground cave, and that is where the game both metaphorically and quite literally hits a very low point, as Jenny barely interacts with characters or does any crime solving. She doesn't interrogate anyone like in the first half of the game, or does many deductions. Basically, the entire game just turns into a very generic puzzle platforming, and that section lasts for hours. Yes, very hours. It's just a very long sequence. And the second point is that the game ends with a huge cliffhanger, and since everything pointed out to the mystery being solved neatly and very soon, pulling the rug at the last minute and promising that maybe a satisfying conclusion is coming in the future is just, well, that's a very tough pill to swallow, especially if you're expecting to get a complete game from beginning to end, which is what I did. Even though it has these low points, I can still recommend Jenny LeClue for both casual players and hardcore players alike, so long as you understand it is a very story-focused game. That's it, I guess. Well, this one took 5 years to make, I think. So let's hope the sequel doesn't take as long and we can see where the story ends for Jenny LeClue. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention. During the game, you can make choices that can affect the story, not very deeply, it's more of a telltale kind of, the story is tailored by your choices rather than the story changes by your choices. But one of the most interesting things is that you can get a profile of your personality based on your choices, and it seems I got the CEO profile. If any of you guys play the game, post on the comments what your profile was,